Hi, it's Rachel with Stirring the Deep. I want to talk a little bit about what it truly means to be born again. In John 3:3, Jesus answered and said to him, "Most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." This is what we desire, right? To be born again. But what does that really mean, and how do we know when we are born again? What's the testimony of it? To be born again is to be spiritually alive and to be growing in the spirit. So you're leaving everything of this world behind and the flesh behind, and you're growing into the spirit. In verse 5, it says, and Jesus answered, "Most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit." So when we're first born into this world physically, we're born into the flesh with a flesh nature, and that's what's ruling us and controlling us, which is it's it's a slave to sin. You don't even try to sin. That's just what you do. You're walking contrary to God. You're following your own way. And that's why we have to seek to start walking into the truth, because that's the nature that we're born with. But as you start seeking, what happens is you start coming into the awareness and knowledge of God. And as your spirit starts to get to that truth, that feeds that seed in you of life, the part of God that's in you. And that's, as that seed gets that nourishment, you start being born into the spirit realm. And that starts to grow. And what happens is when you're born of the flesh nature and that sin nature, it is governed and it is developed off of a foundation of fear, fundamentally. And that fear is a strong motivator in many things in our life. And it's so much of a motivator that we don't even see it for what it is anymore. We've called it so many other things that we don't understand that it's really fear that is driving us in a lot of situations. And it has a certain control over us, a fear of being rejected, a fear of not having value, a fear that we're not worthy, fear of not being loved. When you're born of the Spirit and you start growing in the Spirit, your foundation, instead of fear, starts becoming love. And the purest of love, the love of God, not the love of this world that's tainted and corrupted and hypocritical, but it's a true, pure love. And what I mean by that is a very honoring love to you, to another person or other people, and to God. So in any one act, whether it's a word, a thought, an action, for it to be pure love, it's going to be honoring to all three, to you, to the other person, and to God. Now, when we're honoring God, how do we do that? We honor God when we obey Him. And it says that if we love Him, we obey Him. So honoring God is walking in truth and walking in His commands, which is love. Because some of the commands is first love God, right, with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and then love others. And it has to be in that order, because only when you really know God's love and you receive that, and thus you have that love within you and you love yourself because you understand the creation that you are in God, then you can start loving others, because you can only give what you have and you give what you are. So that's that whole dynamic. So when you start moving and growing in love, and so the foundation from all that you do starts transitioning to love, that is that born again. That's being born of the Spirit. That's growing in the Spirit. Now you're becoming spirit-minded and not flesh-minded or carnal-minded. So everything in your life starts to change. Now, when we're operating in that flesh nature, the end of that is death. Because anything that's not of God dies. Because God is life, God is love. So anything contrary to that ends in death. So when you start walking in the paths of life and of love, you start, life blooms. And that's also, when you're walking in love, you're also walking in righteousness and you're walking in truth. Because again, God is all of those. God is righteous, He is truth, He is love. And they're all sort of expressing the same thing. Because when you're operating in love, in all those three ways that I mentioned with yourself, God, and others, and that's the purest of love, then you're operating in God's truth and by His wisdom. And when you read in Proverbs 12:28, it says, "In the way of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death." So as you're walking in righteousness, which is walking in that love, then life starts to grow, and there is no death or the things of death, right? Pain, suffering, hardship, illness, sicknesses, all these things. It's life that starts growing up around you. And so this is the foundation that starts growing in your life. And another verse I want to share with you is Psalm 112:1. It says, "Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in His commandments," because His commandments are in love. Right? So once you start walking in those, you start walking in love, and let me tell you, it changes your life, it changes you, it transforms you, because you're transforming into a new creation that's eternal, that's holy, that's of love. You are become a child of God, a child of love. It is a beautiful thing to become. And all of this is so possible because of what Christ has given us, His very Spirit to come dwell in us so that we can walk and become and be transitioned into these new creations. But that's what it really means to be born again, and that's how you know, because you see your foundation, and all that you do is transitioning and transforming into being from a place of true love instead of fear or any other motive for that matter. And another important aspect of this is that when you start understanding about love and what is the most loving thing in any situation, you realize that you need the overseer. You need the Creator to be guiding you in all those acts of love, because only He sees the beginning from the end. We only see a small part of life. So we need Him to govern us because He knows what's truly loving. But that's the part of Christ filling us. And it's Him actually working in us and through us because He knows what's perfect love is. So that's our humility. And that's the true humility. When you surrender to the fact that apart from Him you can do nothing. Apart from Him you can't truly love, because you don't know the beginning from the end. You don't know what's perfect in every circumstance, but He does. And He starts to guide you and counsel, and as you become aware of that counsel and walk in that wisdom and walk in that truth, you start walking in love, and that changes everything around you. And that's how you grow into that spirit being and become spirit-minded. And that's the true rebirth. Till next time, keep stirring the deep. It's the one thing that changes everything else.